Welcome to the podcast, Tracy. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So, why don't we start with just telling the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and why I was so intrigued to reach out to you?
So, my name is Tracy Otsuka, and I am now the author of the book called ADHD for Smartass Women with HarperCollins. And I also have a podcast with 6 million downloads of the same name, ADHD for Smartass Women. What I do is I help ADHD women fall in love with their brains. I do not believe ADHD is a disorder. I believe it is a difference. And once you figure out how your ADHD brain works, well, how ADHD brains work in general, but then how your specific ADHD brain works, the sky's the limit. So that's what I do. I've worked with thousands of women with
The sky
ADHD.
is the limit, and I think what you do is so profound and so life-changing for so many women. Just listening to one of your interviews as we started working together, I learned so much about myself that I didn't even realize, even though there were suspicions and things that were going on in my head. I did not realize some of the things about myself until I listened to that interview. You have such a great take on ADHD for women, and I think unlocking the door for so many people just to start to open up that conversation for themselves. How did that happen for you? How did you get involved in this world and became so passionate to support so many other women in this as well?
Well, it started with my son. He was diagnosed when he was 12 after 3+ years of all different kinds of therapies from, visual processing therapy to occupational therapy. Nobody called out ADHD. And he was diagnosed. And I remember I was shocked because I thought, if you're diagnosed with ADHD, it means you're not very smart, you're all over the place, and you are not destined for
Mhm.
anything great, right? And in my son, I saw this kid who was so ambitious and so interesting and so interested and really wise beyond his years in many areas and a little bit immature in other areas. I didn't understand what it meant. So we ended up hiring a psychologist who is a specialist in ADHD in our area. She met with him, she met with our family, she met with my husband and me at the end. And she told us, our job as his parents was to reduce his expectations so he would not be disappointed in life. He was far too ambitious for her liking. And I was like, no. So we never went back. I started to do all the research. I wanted to know everything I could to help him. And lo and behold, 8 months later, and it took 8 months. But I finally realized that, oh my gosh. So, first of all, ADHD is about as genetic as height. So, if your child has it, there's a very good chance that, one or more of the parents have it. And lo and behold, he got it from me. And the difference, though, is, and the reason it took me 8 months is ADHD can look very different in women. And so when you typically think of that stereotypical boy who's climbing the walls and he's, mouthing off and being annoying to everyone in his life, those are the kids that typically get diagnosed with ADHD because they are annoying to the adults around them. Versus girls often do much more masking. So they internalize their symptoms rather than externalizing them and being annoying to the world. And that looks more like they're in their head and they're beating themselves up and they're trying to, be the good girl, do what they're supposed to do. Um, and so instead, they're diagnosed with anxiety and depression instead of ADHD. And sometimes it's comorbid, but often it's not. And if you um, treat the ADHD symptoms, the anxiety and depression is treated as well. Girls are also diagnosed typically later in life. So, what it looks like is that puberty hormones is what impacts their symptoms, their ADHD symptoms. Versus for boys, they tend to be younger, 7 to 9 years old. So, um, double the amount of girls have inattentive ADHD than boys, which explains the difference in symptoms. And inattentive ADHD looks like in a girl, the girl who's sitting in the back of the classroom and she's not paying attention to anything that the teacher's saying. She's in her own little world, her own creating this little fantasy. And all of a sudden, fantasy land, and all of a sudden the teacher will ask her a question and she's like, What? Like she didn't even realize that she's in class, let alone in school, right? Um, and for the adult woman, it can look a lot like the absent minded professor. So, in her area of interest, she's positively brilliant. But then the everyday things of life, like paying bills, getting the kids, to school on time, making sure the house is, clean, dinner's on the table, like, yeah, not so much. She's not good at those kinds of things. And because she's not good at those things, she tends to just look at those things that she's not particularly good at, and she loses sight of the fact that she's absolutely brilliant in this other area of life. But she can't even see her brilliance anymore because she's so focused on what she can't do well.
My mind has just exploded. I'm probably sure for many listeners as well, because I can so relate to so many things that you just said right now, from the little girl who was in this imaginary world in the back of the class and not raising their hand, and to the woman who is so focused and so good at what they do, and yet there's other aspects and areas of their life where they're not. Wow, Tracy, you are amazing.
So, can I say one
Yes.
more thing? I don't know what the typical age or the average age of your listener is, but I believe there is something called maturity onset
Okay, what's that?
ADHD. And so in younger years, you can have all of the really positive traits of ADHD, the hyperactivity, the drivenness, really interested in success, want to move whatever you're passionate about forward. But then all of a sudden later in life, you wake up and you don't even recognize your personality. All the confidence is gone. You're questioning everything. You're forgetting everything. And that's, what's creating
Mm,
anxiety. And that was more my type of
yeah.
ADHD. So I am extremely hyperactive. And so I was, if nothing, if not driven. And that was a real key term for me. When I discovered that drivenness is a form of hyperactivity, that is when the light bulb went on. And I was like, oh my God, he got his ADHD
Wow.
from me because I was nothing if not driven. And you don't typically think of someone with ADHD as being classically successful. But for a lot of women, and I say women because that's who I work with, that's exactly what happens. And then all of a sudden in midlife, say 45 and on, you start to struggle with these symptoms that you've never struggled with. So, real problems with working memory, real problems with confidence, problems with organization, just, not remembering your words. And the reason for that is, we talked about how typically the symptoms come up in puberty for girls.
Mm.
It's hormones. So there are very few studies, because there are always very few studies when it involves women, but there are a few that show that estrogen modulates dopamine. And this is for any woman. This is not just for women with ADHD. But what our brains are lacking for everybody with dopamine is, and we don't know, is it that they're lacking it or we don't process it the same way? It's dopamine. So we already know that for every decade of life, our dopamine levels go down 10% for everyone. Okay. And then on top of that, you take perimenopause and menopause, and we know that our estrogen levels go
Mhm.
down, right? And so, if estrogen modulates dopamine, that means our dopamine levels go down. Then you stack a third one on top of that, which is ADHD. And it's no wonder many of us feel like the whole bottom, the whole, what am I trying to say? If it's like a house, the whole foundation has literally fallen to the ground. So, there is definitely, and I talk to thousands of women, that I've talked to over the years, and they have had that experience where they were just perfectly fine, C-suite executives running their own companies, creatives, whomever, doing just fine. And then all of a sudden, around mid 40s, late 40s, it just starts getting worse and worse. And so now we have a reason or an
That makes
explanation.
so much
And that would be my
sense.
form of
Yes, yeah,
ADHD.
and
Yeah.
I think that's everything you're saying makes perfect sense. I'm using myself as the example, and as it relates to you as the example of now going through perimenopause, and this is the time that I've noticed over the past couple. I think it's started in the past couple of years of a shift in the way I think and the way I relate, and some inner struggles of going, "Oh my gosh, things are getting harder for me now in terms of working memory,
Mhm.
of being able to respond to people's questions swiftly, whereas before it used to be so easy. Now I'm like, I've got to think about it. What's wrong with is there something wrong with me? At one point I thought very early on, I thought, is this like the beginnings of my brain going? Like,
Like
yes.
dementia. Yeah, and that's a common comment. So I was tested for
Mm.
Parkinson's because I was just like, there's something not right here. And then I would complain about struggles with like little buttons, and my handwriting
Mm.
changed. And so that's when my doctors were like, okay, you said enough. We're going to test you for Parkinson's. But this is very common that we think we've got some form of
Wow.
dementia.
It's so great to be having this conversation because I think a lot of people go through, especially this midlife where things start to shift and hold it in and think that, others aren't going through this, that it's a one way
Yeah.
street. But there's so many women who are experiencing the same thing. It's just that we don't consider having the conversation, are afraid to have the conversation. So I'm so thrilled that you're saying all of this. What really fascinates me, obviously, because I come from a voice and communication background, is when we started working together and you approached me, you were about to launch this book. You were going to be speaking on more
Hmm.
stages, a lot of podcast stages, and you needed some support in that. Let's talk about that journey because I think it will resonate with so many people that are listening. Why did you reach out to me first and foremost?
So, this is all related to ADHD. So, prior to having ADHD, I remember as a child, I had this incredible working memory. And memory is, your ability to, it's short term. It's your ability to memorize things. It's your ability to recall. So when you're trying to explain something that you just read, that, you can hold it in your memory. And I was so good. I was the lead in, so I'm Japanese American, and my mom was German. I was the lead in the American plays. I was the lead in the German speaking plays because German was my first language. I could remember songs, I could remember all of it. And then I went through puberty, and I still remember standing in front of my 8th grade classroom, and I was reporting on a book, and I literally forgot everything. I didn't know what the book was called. I couldn't remember anything. And I remember my teacher at the time writing disturbed speaker. And that has stuck with me literally for decades. And I was the one who was used to always getting, A's, like being top of the class for everything. So I didn't know what was going on with me. And I also remember right around, early puberty, my father saying to me something along the lines of, "Well, you're so dramatic." A lot of us with ADHD were accused of being dramatic. And because we're like gushers, we're like often big personalities, and so the highs are really high, but then the lows can be low because the highs are so high, right? And I remember him saying, "You should be in a soap opera." And he was serious, like, "You should consider this because I think this would be a good career for you." And I remember thinking, I would love to be on a soap opera, but I could never remember like my script. There's no way. And so it was this, this night and day with between being able to be so good at all of that memorizing, and then all of a sudden not being able to rely on it at all. And so that has always been the loop that kind of plays in my brain, that I'm just terrible at anything that where I need to rely on my memory. So I'm either really good impromptu, or I'm really good if I plan. So what I tend to do is I over plan everything. Like I just overplan everything. And so I was worried about how do I go into these situations where, whether it is speaking on stage, whether it is, I've done a lot of, with the book tour, I've done a lot of, events where they're not huge events, but, you've got 40, sometimes more women who are asking me questions in a kind of a Q&A type setting. I'm really good. And I knew that if I can go to a prepared speech where I know I've got slides, I know everything that I'm going to say. I can't memorize anything, but I learn it enough that I can do that. But anything that is not like that, where someone will ask me a question and I know the answer, but I can't access it. And I can't access it, I think, because when I get, well, this is just what happens when we get anxious, our stress levels go up, our prefrontal cortex, which is where all of that stuff happens in the brain, it goes offline and you become, you can't access the word even more. And so it just becomes this cycle. And that's what I was so fearful of. Just how could I have written a book, spent 2 years writing a book, and I was fearful of someone's going to ask me about something in the book and I'm not even going to remember having written it, which is very common for me. So that's why I came to you, because I thought I had heard about you and I had heard about your work, and I thought that maybe she can help me, because I didn't know how much of it was ADHD and just my brain, and how much of it was all the stuff I was telling myself, which I'm sure didn't make it
Right.
better,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you did fantastic. And we were having a little chit chat before we press record that it was kind of a sense of, why I know we did some things together. I can't remember exactly what it was, but all I know is that it worked. And for me, that's what
Hmm.
I always want for anyone that I work with. Truth be told, is that it's the same. I work with entrepreneurs, I work with actors, and I always say, the work that we do together, it's very much a conscious effort where we're thinking about it and we're experimenting and we're exploring and we're using that part of our brain where it's the more logical side, where we can access that part so that we can start to build that kind of muscle memory, that it becomes a little bit more easy and comfortable for us to do when we go into these um, experiences where we're on interviews or stepping on a stage on our own, and we can release that part of the brain and live in the part where it's it, it gives us a different sort of access into the emotional experience, into the connection with those that are listening. And you do forget, you don't realize what's happening in the moment because you're so invested in that experience. So I love when people say, I don't remember. I'm there and I know it works. That's music to my ears. I'm so happy for you.
Well, I think that, so I'm starting to remember that what happened a lot was, I mean, what helped a lot was getting much clearer on the message and what was it important for me to talk about. So I one of the ways that I remember, I just recorded a podcast episode with a speech pathologist, and we were talking about this where, oh gosh, remember the word
Yes,
holes we
that's
were talking
right.
about?
Yeah,
Where
it's
all
coming
of a sudden
back.
I'll be going, and this was what I was worried about, exactly what's showing up now, where I will start to talk about something, and all of a sudden it's like, I always analogize it to, you've got all these butterflies and you've got to get the
Mm,
net around them, because, and those are, the butterflies are my thoughts. So if I don't get the net around
mm,
them, they're gone. And I remember we were working together and you listened. I sent you, I was on a podcast and I was like, I totally bombed this. And I sent you the episode and you listened to it. And I thought I bombed it because that's what happened. And so I said, okay, that's just a word hole. That's just what happened. The word just kind of goes off and I don't know where it goes. And at some point it comes back, but I never can quite predict when. And you said to me, I thought that was the best part of the podcast interview. That was actually the thing where I realized that, okay, this is not about me. This is about whose life can I change every time I get out there and speak? And so if there is a person listening and they think, oh, I don't have ADHD, that's not me. But then they hear what happens, when my brain just goes offline and all of a sudden I lose access to the word or the thought or, the whole concept that I was just talking about. Maybe that's what they would relate to. And it could really help them either say, oh, maybe I do have ADHD and I should check this out. Or, oh my gosh, that happens to me all the time. I have ADHD. And look, she just kind of blows it off like, oh, it's a word hole. So that was really helpful that I discovered that I'm going to lean into the thing that I'm most fearful of. And when I go into a podcast, first thing, and this is something that you advise too, it's what is the phrase that signifies your intention, your mission. And for me, it is always change that life. So instead of focusing on myself and, oh my God, I'm going to look so stupid, it's like, no, what life can you change with your words? Because there's someone out there who is going to listen to this who has never thought about ADHD. And all of a sudden, a light bulb's going to go off and it will change their life to know that what's going on with their brain is ADHD, to also know that 43% of all people with ADHD are in excellent mental health. I didn't say good mental health. I didn't say okay mental health. I said excellent mental health, but we never talk about that. And so I think because we just assume that ADHD means and ADHD has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. But we assume, it means you're not very smart, you're not, you're all over the place and you're just not going to do great things. That is completely untrue. So I think when we know that 43% of people with ADHD are in excellent mental health, that is additional hope, right? So let's get that other, I can't do numbers, but whatever the other percentage is, let's get them over to do what the 43% are doing so their mental health can be better.
That's such a great point because I think that's probably a concern for people, and it's nice to know that statistic. That
We have parents that their kid is diagnosed and they don't tell the child ever. And then the child will be like 35 and discover they have
mm,
ADHD. Like, what the hell? What kind of thinking is that? So, that is how the shame around ADHD is built up, right? I'm not going to tell them. I don't
you
want
know what?
anybody
You're
to
right
know.
because when our son was diagnosed, he was 7, and we didn't tell him right away because he
Mhm.
was 7, and we thought it's maybe too much information to give him now. And thinking about when we told him, I think was when he was starting high school. So when they start high school over here in Australia, it's year 7 is when they call high school. Here is the start of it. That's when we told him.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
prolonged it because we weren't sure if he was um, you know, ready to receive that information. So that is interesting that you bring that up.
Because and ready to receive the information. So think about it. If this was information like, "You have an IQ that's 200," you would
You're
have told
right.
him right
Yes,
away,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Because, that's something that's really positive, but we think of ADHD as something
Yeah.
that's negative, and it's not bad or good, it is different, but there are great things about ADHD that once they're from the time that you know about it, once they understand what it looks like and what they can do with it, it can only
Mm,
be empowering if we really believe that and feel
yeah.
it, right? And I think a lot of times parents think that, well, maybe there was a mistake. Maybe it's not ADHD. Maybe they'll grow out of it. And then the last one is, well, they're afraid that maybe they're going to put those thoughts into that kid's mind and then they're going to be more ADHD.
Right.
It's like this whole,
Yeah. And then that's
yeah. But
oh,
if
sorry. Go
we
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to, complete the thought. I hope I can remember it now that if we present it in such a way, first of all, if we learn about it, right, so that we're excited about it and see the possibilities, and we present it to our child in that way, they're going to see the possibilities too. I mean, I hear from parents all the time, that when it's done in that manner, that the kid is like bragging to everybody, oh my gosh, no, I've got an ADHD brain. I've got a really fast brain. So keep up,
Yeah.
you know?
I love that. It's so true, and I think this is important for the then mothers who of a child that then start to see in them some of those symptoms as well as you recognized, as I recognized as well for myself. And there is something that happens when you go, because my son was also diagnosed with autism. There was that, and that came later on. So the diagnosis for the
Mm,
inattentive ADHD, age 7, the diagnosis for the autism, age 14. So there's a 7-year gap with that. And I think
yeah.
more so with the autism, there was almost like this shame, or like, what did I do wrong as a
Mm,
parent? Like, how did I fail?
ah,
There's almost this mourning for the child that you thought what their future would look like, and is it going to be harder for them?
mm,
That there's this period of like real transition, not just for the child but for the parents. And if you are a parent who is experiencing and starting to realize, oh my gosh, there's parallels there. It's like your life starts to go backwards and you start to go back the timeline and go, this makes sense. This makes sense. And now I can see myself in my child and now
mhm.
I can relate. There was a point where I thought, you know what? I don't want to be quiet about this. I actually want to amplify this experience so that others can build the awareness around this and realize that it's okay to, have ADHD. It's okay to have autism. And it's important for us to start having these conversations so that it becomes a new norm for others to realize that it is a superpower and that we should be embracing and celebrating it instead of hiding it and not talking about it.
Absolutely. Shame just really messes with our nervous
Yeah.
systems, right? Because it causes us to mask. And our kids see that too. And so you can talk a good game, but if they see that there are certain people you're hiding it from, or, they pick up on all of that. And what I always say is, okay, well, based on the statistics, it looks like 20% of the population has some sort of neurodivergency, right? Whether we're talking about autism or dyslexia or learning challenges or ADHD. And so, if 20% of a population has this neurodivergency, then why are any of these things disorders? Why aren't they just variations on
Hmm.
normal?
Yeah.
It's a spectrum. And we have people on different ends of this spectrum. So I don't know. I think we need all brains. And I think we are slowly discovering that, certainly with, the onset now of AI. And we've got this big internet, which is, still a lot like the wild, wild west. We need these kinds of brains, these, hyper focused, interest driven brains that when you put them in an area of interest, when they figure out what it is that they're really interested in, and that really is the key to all of this, um, they learn faster and better and are more passionate and create businesses around it and frankly, prop up our economy. So I I just don't see why, honestly, typical brains are really boring to me. It's hard for me to be around them, for a long time because they often don't talk about things that are exciting and new and different. And certainly for the ADHD brain, it's all about ideation. We are idea people. And so I love being around other people with ADHD brains. Yeah, they're just more
We're more
interesting.
interesting. Okay, so question. For those that are listening, because I work with
Mhm.
a lot of experts, entrepreneurs who want to speak on more stages, and maybe they're holding back because they realize that there's something about their brain that they struggle, and so potentially, I think what
Mhm.
I see a lot of people do is avoid speaking because
Mhm.
of this, because of the wormholes and the things that come up for them, the working memory. I'm not going to remember my keynote speech. What advice or tips do you have for somebody who is starting to, learn more about it, recognize maybe that's me. They want to do something about it so that they can, you know, step into that next level of themselves and really be successful.
So, the beauty of writing a book, I think writing a book is the best self development you can ever possibly do. Because you are literally for 2 years, I have been outside
Mm,
of my comfort zone. And the only way that we can grow as people, the only way we can grow our businesses is to step into the fear every single day. So I always joke around about, you need to be uncomfortable once a day, but I wasn't really doing it until I wrote this book. And then for 2 years, I was uncomfortable every single day. Um, and I still feel like I'm not through it yet. I'm not out the other end. There's still so many other things that scare the crap out of me. But the truth of the matter is, how do we grow, right? If we are not every day stepping into the fear, isn't that why we decided to build a business to begin with, not to step into the fear, but to really grow ourselves and help those people that we really want to help. And so if you can stop thinking about yourself and think about your advice, that one person, who is it out there that I am meant to help change their life? And the only way that they are going to know that I'm their person, that I'm here, is if I'm visible. And the only way I'm going to be visible is by speaking. Like, I can't, I guess you could be visible writing, but at some point, you're going to get to the level where people are going to want you to
yeah.
speak, right? So, and it's the fear too that, okay, so what I will also say about speaking is I think it's the fastest way to increase your
Mm,
confidence. People think that confidence, it's either there or it's not there. You're either born confident or you're not. And that's hooey. That is so not true. You you get more confident by doing the things that you really want to do for you and for whomever is part of your purpose, and making yourself uncomfortable by stepping into the fear and doing that thing so you can move forward what it is that you really want to move forward. So I am just delighted that I decided to just bite. And I was so busy at the time. I was like, how am I going to fit this in? It was like right around the holidays, but I am just so delighted because my book came out on December 26th. So it was literally in the throes of this typical ADHD, completely last minute. And it just so happened that I think because of the holidays, you were shutting down and you were kind enough to say, okay, I'll work with you. And we literally did it. I think we did 4 sessions over
2 weeks or something
like
yeah,
a
it
week
was
and a
very
half or something.
intensive.
It was, yeah, it was. And I literally did not have the time to do this, but I'm so grateful that I did it because, as I said, I'm not quite sure what you did, but and I think a big part of it, though, now that that I've kind of been processing it with you right here, is this idea that the stuff that we are so fearful about and that we think we are so like bad at, to have someone who's an expert in this come back and say, "Wait a minute, no, that was not." That was the best part. That was not the worst part. It just really helped me to flip my thoughts around, who cares if you get up there and you mess up? What if you're the role model for that person who's so, and people tell me this all the time, but I hadn't connected it, that like with, we have 6 million downloads on the podcast and I get a lot of messages and people will tell me, what I love is that when you mess up, you just laugh about it and you keep going. And it really gave me like a new role model to look at for what I could do now instead of spiraling down and beating myself up. So you gave me that permission. And then it was helping me organize my thoughts, because that's the other thing with ADHD. We are so creative because we have so many thoughts. That's exactly why. But it also means that when you have so many thoughts, it's really hard to hone in on, okay, well, what are the major thoughts that people need to hear? Because you get so close to it. And you were so good about teasing all of that out really quickly, actually. And okay, these are the main points. how do you feel about this? And then I know what I was starting to say when I lost my train of thought. What I do is, so the ADHD brain, we're real big picture brains. And so if we don't have the big picture, we really struggle with the details. So I always need the big picture first. And when we get anxious, we can lose the big picture. So what I tend to do is I put together these, I'm very visual. And so I put together these one page on cardstock kind of visual graphics of, the main point and then the points that shoot off of it. And I had a bunch of those. And after working with you, and so I keep them just for kind of like security. So in case I forget, okay, what is the
Mm,
big picture? After working with you, what I was able to do, able to pretty much take all of those and consolidate it into
great.
one, which is one graphic that I've now been able to memorize in my brain. I can see it, like where, like what are the three telltale signs, like all
Yeah.
that stuff that we worked on. And I can use that to pretty much get to respond to any question that comes of me because it's all around three central
Mm.
points. So that was a really long winded explanation, but it was really, really helpful. And I still don't know how much of it was, well, I actually do. I think a lot of it was my thoughts that needed to change around speaking because it was weird. Like, how could you be so because what's the thing where people would rather die than
Yes, it's the
speak,
number one fear.
like public
Yes.
speaking? Yeah, but I didn't have that. So you put me in a situation where I'm organized and I know exactly what I need to speak on. And I'm like, glowing. I love it so much. And then also, every week, I mean, this is what I do. I can speak in front of, I mean, this particular example is online, but I can speak with thousands of women and it's very impromptu where they come in and they're asking me questions and I can do that. So working with you made me realize that my fear was more around that I wasn't going to get it right, that there was a certain way to do it. And that was not allowing me to be
Mm,
more of me, which is really why I've been
yeah.
successful, right? I was trying to, or I was thinking I needed to be more like them, whoever them is, instead of leaning
Yeah.
into who I
Yeah.
am.
Brilliant. Well, I'm so thrilled for you. And it's really exciting to see how much you've stepped into um, the authenticity of you and allowing people to see that, the the definition of being successful is not being polished and perfect. It's right, it's
Yeah.
allowing people to see that you're just like everyone else. We all have different strengths and
Yeah.
weaknesses, but it's about, for you now being able to share your message in a much bigger way to impact others, and if you just impact one person on that day, on that podcast, on that stage, that's what it's all
Yeah.
about. So congratulations. I'm so thrilled for you, Tracy. And absolutely love the work that you do. You have this incredible book. Do you mind just sharing with the audience a little bit about the book? I mean, obviously, we've talked about it today, but how can people find it as well so that, if people are thinking about, this might be me too, how can they start to access more information through the book?
Yeah. So, my book, ADHD for Smartass Women. As you can see, this is not a typical, like, medical grade, boring blue gray book. And I did that on purpose. And I love the name because smartass, yeah, we can be irreverent. That's kind of part of the part of the ADHD brain. Most of us have a really good sense of humor. But we're also really smart and we have these incredibly brilliant brains. And so, that's why I wrote it. I wanted to make sure that I didn't do that. I pushed against the mainstream narrative and I didn't do what all the other, ADHD books are doing. So they can find it at ADHDforsmartwomen.com or any place they buy their
Amazing.
books.
And where can people listen to you as well? Because you've got a fantastic podcast.
Everywhere that you would find a podcast, and again, it's the same name, ADHD for Smartass
Love
Women.
it. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being on the podcast. Congratulations. And I'm wishing you all the best on your journey.
Thank you, and thank you for oh my gosh,
Oh,
thank you for
my
your help.
pleasure.
It made it so much easier. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't
Oh,
met
well,
you.
it's been such a joy to work with you, and I'm cheering you on from halfway around the world.